that shift from building hard skills to soft skills, and soft skills really being the unlocker if you desire, not everyone does, to be at a certain level within their career, it is instrumental to where you want to go, because it means that you can get work done with other people. It means you can build relationships. It means that you can have context in everything that you're doing. And that shift, I would say, is a really, really hard one. I found that myself, even in this second part of my career, and certainly I see that with a lot of, especially, I would say, women today.
Hey, everyone, I'm Peter Barron.
And I'm Brendan Schneider.
Yeah, and welcome to the Leadership Backstory. So, Brendan, this is going to be a fun interview. We have Christine Evans on the call today. Christine, welcome to the podcast.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Christine's got an amazing career. Brendan, you have a long relationship with her, so I know that's going to, you'll talk about how you guys met and all the things that happened there. But Christine, you are now the CMO and Chief Strategy Officer at Headspace, which, fascinating company. I remember listening to a podcast with your founder a couple of years ago and be like, wow, this is super cool. You're doing all sorts of neat things there, but we're going to get there. But there was a whole journey that you took to get to that place. And I've joked on the pod before that like LinkedIn is my source of truth here. So, I've got it up in front of me again. And fascinatingly enough, like you started in the fashion industry. Is that right?
That's right. My college degree is in textiles and apparel. And so I had a very different college experience in which I learned, how to silk paint, how to embroider, how to drape, pattern making, kind of this whole, while getting a great liberal arts education. Yeah. And I graduated and I was like, oh, I guess this is what's happening. This is what I'm doing. And so I worked for 6 to 7 years or so in New York as a sweater designer for a number of the bigger box brands that you might know of. So Ann Taylor Loft, which is a brand part of Ann Taylor, the company, what's now called Macy's Merchandising, so private label for them. And it was just a fascinating experience. My first time living in a big city. So I lived in New York City for about 6 to 7 years, again, doing that. And, it's a part of my career and of my life that I think was just so instrumental in helping me to figure out, certainly who I am, but really what I want to do and what gets me up in the morning. And, if I were to kind of put any headline on that, and it's so interesting in the time of the pandemic right now, where people are really reevaluating what they do with their time and how they spend their lives. And I would say with that experience, you also don't always have to do what you love. And sometimes the things that you love need to stay the things that you love. And preserving the sanctity of that can be really important. So that's one big headline coming out of that. Well,
I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, me too.
I've always had an interest in fashion and design. And, throughout my life really have been both interested in the arts, both musical, visual, etc. And I like making stuff, I wouldn't call myself a crafter, but I'm really into like the textiles art still today. And, when you get into the industry of it and you see what happens, which is a really instructive process to go through, right? For example, and I don't know how it is today because it's been, many years since I've been in the industry, and I'm sure it moves much more quickly. But at the time, you're really going through the process of developing a set of products and a set of offerings 12 times a year on a very regular, you're just creating on a regular basis in a way that's time locked, in a way that is process oriented and repetitive and great if you're an early career, because you know what it takes from a collaborative standpoint to know everything that goes into like this thing that I'm wearing today. And so that part of it, I think, was incredibly helpful for me. I think as I got through that part of my career, a couple things became obvious to me. One, as I looked at the folks who were in leadership positions with these companies, where you sort of step away from the data design role, right, where you're not actually sitting there sketching something. The thought of that was just not that appealing to me. I love designing. And I'm sure that, if you talk to folks who have been in the design world, I think that that career progression can be a really tricky one because you generally go into it because you love doing that thing. And I didn't see myself becoming a creative director. I didn't see myself becoming a VP of design. It was not that interesting to me. And so, probably about the 5th year through my career. So I'll give you a lens into what it's like to sort of create a product. We would design about 3 times the amount of product that would go out into the store. And when we narrow it down to what we want to produce, we go through a whole process of working with our vendors overseas, working with fit models, that are specifically designed with dimensions to be able to represent your buying customer. And I remember there was, and it's like so present in my mind. So as a sweater designer, I designed a lot of twin sets, right, for like women who are working. And this particular twin set was like a July delivery piece, and it was white. It was made of like a synthetic knit material, and I'm going to try my best to describe this. It was sort of like cut in at the shoulders, and then if you see this neckline that I have here, it was crochet all the way around, and then there was like a cardigan that went on top that matched. And I remember I spent along with many of my colleagues, we'd sit 3 hours weekly in these fittings where, the fit model tries things on, and we'd have discussion about how someone would use this product or wear this. And this was a very controversial twin set because, we have a target person who's going to, where you expect would wear this to work. And the question was, what happens because her bra strap shows? Right. It was like, well, it's like see-through here. It's like cut in here. And everyone's like, well, she's going to wear the cardigan. So like, it doesn't matter. They'd be like, no, she'd wear a strapless bra. And other people say, well, no, like no one wears a strapless bra. And I ended up over a 2-week period with this particular SKU talking about this hypothetical woman's bra strap for like hours. And I remember like being in my apartment, sitting back and I'd be like, it's an important problem. But this is not the problem that I actually want to be solving, is like a bra strap hypothetical issue. What's so ironic about this and funny is at the time I was living in New York, and you do that thing where you like spend $700 to build some drywall so someone can live in the dining room. That was our living situation. And I was in my room, my doors closed, and my one of my roommates who was worked for a judge out in New Jersey. I'm doing her clerkship. She knocks on my door. She's like, hey, Christine, I have a question. I need your advice on something. I open the door and she goes, do you think it matters that my bra strap's showing? And she's wearing the thing. And this is, a year later because, it'd taken time to hit and I just looked at her and I was like, you have no idea how long I've talked about this.
Did she know you designed that one?
No, I don't think she did. I mean, she knew it was from like, but she didn't know. And so that's sort of my journey of like, I know I don't want to be doing this, but I don't know what I want to do. And so I did all sorts of, I studied for, I don't remember my GRE. I thought I might want to be an architect. And I was like, well, that probably presents the same set of issues that I'm probably having today. And I ended up taking my GMAT and I went to business school with no idea what I wanted to do. No real business training. And so you're in an environment where you have a bunch of people who have been like investment bankers and management consultants and like can navigate their way around an Excel spreadsheet with like just the keyboard. And my experience with Excel had been like making perfectly square boxes, like making a list. That was it. And so that was a real eye-opener for me in terms of the skills that I probably needed to build to likely make some type of change. I thought maybe I'd get back into the merchandising side of the apparel industry. And what ended up happening is I ended up falling really in love with healthcare marketing, which sounds bananas because it is literally the complete opposite. In so many ways. And so one of the first roles that I took, so a couple things, I graduated from business school in 2009, which was like the first year out of the Great Recession. So here I am, like a former fashion designer with debt and like no real skills, trying to find a job that I couldn't really describe. And so some hustle in there. I took a bunch of either unpaid internships internships along the way, and fell into healthcare marketing from there. And I don't want to say the rest is history. That was a journey from there, but that was a pretty critical point for me in terms of finding meaning in my work, solving the kind of problems that I love solving. And interestingly enough, I think applying a lot of what I learned in the previous part of my career, which again, I believe to be really instrumental to my personal and professional growth, into where I am today. So
what drew you to healthcare?
And so a couple things. My family, a lot of my family are in healthcare. My brother's a surgeon. Brendan, you remember Jason, my brother.
I do.
My brother's a surgeon here
That's
at
awesome.
UW, and my father was a surgeon. So a lot of medical folk in the family, and I always found it really fascinating, just like the practice of it, right, and the meaning of it. In as I described in the apparel industry, when you develop a product, it's probably months now, but at the time it was like a year to bring a collection kind of out to market. And contrast that with so my first few roles were in medical devices, where you have one product. It takes you 7 to 10 years to bring this thing to market, and the regulatory environment in which you get to operate is like this big. As a marketer.
Yeah.
And that, to me, like, weirdly, I found just like the most amazing challenge. Like, what can you do with this like tiny box with this time frame that you have, again, 7 to 10 years, maybe if you're lucky 5. And I just found the challenge of that totally invigorating. Right. And to be able to see and to talk to folks, very similar to I used to love on the subway when I lived in New York, to be able to see people wearing something that I know I had a hand in, and just wondering what got them to do it. And in my early sort of health tech career, I'd spent a lot of time with patients themselves to understand what is it they would want from a product, what would get them to use it. An early company I worked for worked on a wearable ventilation system for people with COPD, which is a progressive disease. It's not curable. These are people in stage 3 or 4 of a really debilitating condition. And being able to say, like, what would get you to use this outside of your house and walk around in a way where you wouldn't feel ashamed, where you would feel comfortable, where it would be easy for you to use. And that type of usability, which is practical, but also really emotional, in the same way that, picking something out from a store is and deciding to pull that out of your closet every day is. There was a real connectivity there for me on that front.
Yeah. There's a real depth. I mean, I'm looking at their LinkedIn profile. So that was when you were at Breathe and you were doing product marketing. And boy, does that product marketing, does that just not give you the opportunity to expand what marketing is traditionally considered to be? Like you're in at every single phase of development, from sizing the market to doing the work that you were just talking about, talking with folks. Like, how did that layer on, early on in your career? I'm super curious.
Yeah. So yeah, product marketing in this sort of part 2 of my career has been foundational, and really I have a real bias towards it. And primarily because you're sitting at the intersection, as you put it, Peter, of both creation and communication, which is how do we influence and sort of bring an organization along to really represent what clients need, and then how we communicate that back out to make sure that people know that this thing is available and that they want to buy it. So, and I accidentally fell into this like 1,000%, primarily because in business, so in business schools today, I think, have you working in small groups all the time. And my role in business school was to make the PowerPoint always. Like that was like my one skill. And so that translated actually like pretty well into the workplace, because as I got into product marketing roles, a lot of what you do is actually communication through slides and being able to tell that story in that way. And so that was, I'm going to say it was a total fluke. Because it was, but that happened purely, I would say, by happenstance and a lucky accident of just having played that role both academically and then sort of transferring that practice skill into my day-to-day life. And really being in the early days, both at Breathe, but especially at a company called Castlight Health, which is still based in the Bay Area. When I joined that company, it's about 60 people. And one of my jobs to be done was to create and work in partnership with our sales team to make sure that they could express what it is that we had, right? Which was this ability for employees to go in and shop for healthcare in a price-oriented way, which sadly blows people's mind then and still does today. But nevertheless, getting into that practice of sort of connecting a buyer and a consumer need and that communication of that format was a lot of that early product marketing work. And over time, you build enough expertise in both your product, in your customer, in really the business of what it means to bring this product to market. It was quite translatable, I think, into further parts of my career, certainly at Fitbit now at Headspace. So, product marketing, I think is in particular within health tech, but in technology companies is the basis of connecting great ideas to business value.
Well, Brendan, I know you've got a question, but I just have to say, you're talking to a skilled product marketer, somebody with a deep foundation when they use jobs to be done. Like, I'm like, there you go.
They do.
That is brilliant. I love it.
Yeah. So here's the question, Christine, before we go further. So people know you're a former student of mine. Now, it should be known that I don't think I ever taught you because you were too smart. You were not in my classes, this is a bonus for her. This is definitely speaks highly of you, Christine. But like going back to high school before college, were some of these things percolating in your mind? Or what were you thinking back then? Did you have any idea?
Gosh, that's so. I mean, in theory, I was like, it'd be great to, be a part of a brand, but like I had no concept of what it meant to really like work in this type of environment. And again, from a family standpoint, I was surrounded. My dad was a physician, was a surgeon and a physician, and so we had a family business, and so that's really like kind of all I knew, and I had no real practical or even really adjacent to experience of what any of this means, which we can talk about maybe some of the impacts down the line of that. But I think more than anything, I really had no idea what I wanted to do.
Fair. No,
and I went into college, just very frankly, I applied. I remember early decision to college with the hope that they would just accept me, and that show of like, I will take this role if you take me would be enough for them to say like, yes, we'll take you. So that was vastly simplified. And also, I don't want to say like I cut myself short, but I just didn't know. And I knew that I loved textiles and art and doing this thing, and that I just kind of fell into it. And that's, I say that from a place of like enormous privilege, right? To be able to say, well, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Let's move back. All those things, right? So you have to recognize that that's like a key part of this. But I had no idea.
Yeah,
be honest, no idea.
That's totally fair. Do you always? I mean, clearly, we'll talk more about it. I've had a ton of success, and we haven't talked to each other for years, and I get a real sense of confidence. Did you have that back in school? Because I remember you being a very good student, more quiet, right? And you followed rules. Is that fair?
As far as you know, I felt like.
Please don't. I was the dean for a few years. The less I know, the better. Although I think the statute of limitations has passed. Yeah. But like, have you always felt confident? And no, you're shaking your head.
Oh my gosh, no. It really has been only with that, I would say, specifically the last 10 years that so by nature, I am relatively introverted, and I get very nervous public speaking. I don't love it. I am just not someone who loves to be on stage. I'll put it that way. But I learned a lot, I would say. So a couple of things. I think you're absolutely right. And I would say through college and certainly through my early years of work before I went to business school, very, very quiet. Not someone who would advocate for myself, not someone who would raise your hand with a new perspective or a new idea, just not that person. And business school was a real wake-up call because we would have so what they do is they have a lot of the big consulting firms or big CPG companies. As students are starting to graduate or look for internships, they bring them on campus and they do these networking sessions, which was like the most terrifying thing in the world. But I mean, I hated it. And you have to wear a suit. I mean, just like the whole thing just sucked big time. And, you know, I really didn't have, or I don't say have it, I had the opportunity, but I'd never really been forced into building that skill of making connections with people that you didn't know in a way where, you know, might have a business outcome or that your job might be at stake or whatever it might be. And so that was very difficult for me, especially, you know, as I mentioned, it was around the 2007 to 2009 time period when the job market was really not great.
Right.
And so not only do you have someone who's like no marketable skills, but also like doesn't talk, and that becomes tough. And I think what I learned over time, certainly observing a lot of my fellow classmates at Kellogg who had been in these environments, what they had been like, you know, ad agency sort of folks, whether they'd been investment banking, is they really learned how to ask questions. And when you get down to it, I think a lot of my quietness comes from a lack of conviction of the thing that I'm going to say being right. Is that this thing I'm going to say be right, and am I going to look stupid? And I think the reality is the best people that I observed would always ask a clarifying question, would never apologize for asking that question, and used whatever the output was of listening to whatever the response was to inform what was a really well-rounded either response or output or project or whatever it might be. And I guess I learned a lot from, you know, there were very specific folks I remember through my business school career, just like fabulous at this. And so, you know, something that we might want to talk about coming is failures. But I do think that a lot of, when I think about small failures, medium failures, and bigger failures, are just this anxiety around not being right or doing something wrong.
Right.
And sometimes you're just never going to know until you make a mistake either, and you have to be okay with that.
Well, that's where all the good stuff comes, right? Like, you know, you get that feedback. You're like, oh, okay, maybe I go this direction instead of that direction. The other thing I love is,
like when you're okay with knowing that being publicly wrong can sometimes be okay, it's really freeing.
But right? Isn't that also cultural too? Like, it's depending on the company that you're at, like if the leadership is setting the bar that, hey, it's okay to make mistakes, like this is how we're going to learn and grow. Like, was that part of, you know, the early companies that you were with? Like, how did you gravitate towards that after you left business school?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And there's sort of two cultural components for me personally. One, which is my upbringing. So I'm Chinese by background. I was born here in the States. My parents are both from Taiwan. And so I grew up in a very conservative upbringing of like education is, you know, the most important thing that you can do. And like your test scores matter. And like, it's very binary. And this comes from, you know, those of us who know folks who are, who have immigrated even recently. It's the pressures are very different in that culture and in society, you know, in particularly in the East Asian countries, and that translated into my upbringing, but doesn't actually translate into work, right? Meaning, what I found oftentimes, and I remember early on in my career, a lot of my frustrations were like, I know I'm the best at this. I know I'm so good at this, but like, why can I not either get ahead or like, why am I not getting promoted? Why, without ever saying anything about it or like asking the question or getting feedback. And I remember when I quit my job at Ann Taylor, I'd been there for about 2 years, and it was a wonderful experience on the whole, but I'd become really frustrated because I hadn't been promoted, and I was watching people around me getting promoted, and so I quit, found another role. And on my exit interview, I chatted with her name's Sherry Hershon. Have to forward this to her after this because it's always stuck with me. But she was, you know, our executive director of design, and she called me and she goes, "So, you quitting for more money? You know, yada yada yada. Is it because of promotion?" I'm like, "Yes. You know, honestly, it's all of those things." And she just looked at me and she's like, "Well, did you ever ask for them?" I said, "Well, no." And she goes, "All right, well, if you don't ask, like, definitely not gonna get it."
Such a great
and
lesson.
I remember walking out of that conversation like, but like it really stuck with me. and into this, and I don't know if I've actually told her the story since because we've been in touch periodically. and the years passed, but like that always stuck with me. It's like, you just never get, like, if you don't ask, right? And even if you don't feel that confident in asking, or what are the questions you can ask leading up to that question? You know, like I'd never done the discovery around me to do that. So of course you're going to feel a little anxious about asking for promotion if you're not sort of taking those steps to get there. So, you know, one of the things that I certainly saw with myself, and I see even, especially with women on my team or those that I mentor, is that shift from building hard skills to soft skills, and soft skills really being the unlocker if you desire, not everyone does, to be at a certain level within their career. It is instrumental to where you want to go, because it means that you can get work done with other people. It means you can build relationships. It means that you can have context in everything that you're doing. And in that shift, I would say, is a really, really hard one. I found that myself, even in this second part of my career, and certainly I see that with a lot of, especially I would say, women today.
How did you cultivate that for yourself personally?
Practice.
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, it really comes down to just trying things over and over in smaller settings and in bigger settings. I've been lucky, it's so fortunate, certainly within the last 10 years of my career, to have people who believed in me probably more than I did myself, and really pushed me to be out in front, really gave me maybe sometimes unsolicited feedback in a way that I thought was actually like quite healthy for me. And so from that standpoint, I would say I had a lot of people supporting me and rooting for me along the way in ways that I maybe didn't even need. And that's something that I reflect on quite a bit in my role now, and kind of in the years out of that context that I can help provide from just experience of having people had that done for me. And then taking those opportunities and not shying away from them, you know, is that second step that I had to take, and I think all of us have to take when people make that investment.
Yeah,
in you.
I love it. Talk about Fitbit. So you in 2014 moved over to Fitbit. Was that right around when Fitbit came to market, or had it been around earlier? I can't remember.
It had been around. It was, you know, just becoming the thing that everybody was getting for Christmas. And for me, it was a really, what I felt was a pivotal time for me personally in my career, because I was getting back to what I felt was like an exciting consumer brand, but within the context of the things that I had started to build a career and not what was good at. And at the time, so I had been brought in to help grow the B2B side of their business from a marketing perspective. So they had a thriving consumer business. And what they had found, not so different from Headspace, is that companies were calling them up and saying, hey, like, I want to buy like 1,000 of these for my employees.
Right.
What can we do? And so, you know, taking the signal, I think they made a great investment in bringing in teams and people and leaders, including me, to be able to help build what today, under the Google umbrella, is Fitbit Health Solutions, of which some dear friends of mine still do that. So that was instrumental in being able to, what I think, tie those two pieces together. Something that can, of my background, something that can feel kind of icky to marketers, which is like healthcare, right? Like, ooh, healthcare. Like, yes, healthcare is very messy. It's also important, instrumental what we do, and how we live and thrive as a society. And then there's a consumer brand that people love. And I was fortunate enough to be able to work at a company that was stellar at that, right? And be able to help propel at least that side of the business through, I think, were some really incredible tailwinds that had been built there, and is an experience certainly that I've taken with me in my role at Headspace today.
I mean, what a transformational product that was. I mean, that was for me personally, it was the thing that, like, well, first off, I had never been obsessed with steps. Then I became obsessed with steps. Like, okay, and then I got in a little circle and I started competing with people. I'm like, oh, I'm going to beat that person today. Like, there's no way they're going to beat me. But what it ultimately unlocked for me is the concept of like I'm more productive when I'm moving. Like, I think clearer. When I'm talking to people, like, that was just transformational stuff. And like, if I looked at it personally, would I draw a line to healthcare? Probably not in the moment, but now, like, absolutely. Like, I just, what a cool opportunity. Was that the first chance that you had to kind of manage large teams? Like, or were you managing before then?
That was my first opportunity to manage a larger, I would say, multidisciplinary team. So I came in a marketing generalist role. So they were like, we need a marketer doing these things. And I said, I think I can do that. And so I came in and part of my experience, certainly at Castlight, which at the time that I was there, so just to describe this really quickly so you can understand the transformation of these companies, in both cases with Castlight and with Fitbit, I had been with them sort of half of my time as a private company and half of it as a public company. And so that transformation that you go through in terms of product, in terms of process, in terms of culture, like all of those things is a pretty monumental thing to witness. And so I left Castlight having just been a part of that type that transformation as a company. And I think with Fitbit, was prepared and ready to kind of take those learnings and certainly be able to quickly identify like job interview questions. When you come in your first 90 things, like what are the first 3 things you're going to get done? I knew what the first 3 things that I wanted to get done were. I was probably right. I thought I was right. And a lot of it was product marketing. That's a bias. The second was to, find and sort of finagle our way to at least experiment with getting a little bit more of a scalable demand generation engine. And then the third, interesting, probably like the least important of those 3 at the time, was to kind of build a brand that could be relevant within the healthcare space to what is a pretty conservative buying audience, i.e. like a health plan or health system. Because in that case, as we found, and I still find today, an amazing consumer brand can be a little bit of a double-edged sword within those circumstances. So, really came down to, like, in my lived experience of having observed this at Castlight, done some of it myself, what are the first 3 things that I would do? And I had, again, just an incredible set of people around me and above me who believed in that and who helped me invest in that. And it's just an incredible experience.
Yeah. How did managing a large team feel at first? Like, that's so curious how that works for folks. Every time we do have one of these interviews, we talk about like the first time that they managed large teams, and it's just interesting to see how people remember that time. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost so jarring that you don't realize how jarring it is until after you're done doing it. Honestly, it was like day one, it was just me. And in 9 months, it was 20 people.
Wow.
And, and it just, you almost don't have time to think too hard about it. You just have to respond. Which in many cases can be the downfall of a team if you're not very deliberate also about how you build and invest and sort of pace against the business as well. And so, we're seeing a lot of this today, certainly within the tech environment of growth at all costs. And a lot of that comes down to like your investment in talent and people. And while I don't think that I had ever necessarily thought about it in that way, you were always trying to get ahead of what you thought would be happening versus, and that's what I would say, I wouldn't say a failure, but like a learning from my perspective is like, well, if I hire this person, then I can get this thing done. And so we'll like justify this team or this budget, and then we'll do it versus saying, what are the 3 small ways that I can show that this is actually scale so that I will build a team, so that I will have the program budget, so that I will go, create this enormous go-to-market strategy and kind of slow the roll on that. So, so with that, I would say, certainly I learned a lot about better ways to scale teams, because ultimately when people feel that they can be successful in a role, when they're really clear about what they're going after, when they're excited about what they're going after, and the end in mind is very clear for them, you can build a great team. But if you're operating in an environment where like, oh, let's try this and let's do this, and we think we're going to do this thing, but we're not sure, like it's really jarring.
Right.
And I am someone whose eyes are always bigger than my stomach. If there's anything that I've learned certainly in that role is like slow the roll a little bit. That's my bias. And I as I think about building teams, and certainly my next level of leadership, always looking for folks who can check me on that. Like, is this someone who is more cautious, more skeptical maybe than I can be, and who would be unafraid to tell me that they either think I'm wrong or could be doing it differently.
Yeah. How do you, it's, I completely agree. Like getting checked is just, it's a gift, but in having folks feel like they can check can sometimes be challenging. Like, how do you nurture that?
It's such a good question. I mean, I think you have to model the behavior, first and foremost. Oftentimes what I'll do is actually call out in a positive way someone, hey, like so-and-so brought this to my attention. I didn't even think about it. I'm so glad they did. Thank you. Right. And doing that publicly, especially now, and folks everywhere right now are really struggling with sort of like balancing work life. We're all sitting at home and, have no like real social interaction with people. And it's a generally tough time right now. And so people can, we are not able to build relationships in that same way that create a sense of psychological safety as automatically as we would if we would be in an in-person environment. So you have to expressly and explicitly build those relationships as well as call out and really reward people for questioning bias, right? For, challenging the status quo and recognizing that and we may not always take the suggestion, right? But let's recognize the merits of why this came up, why it may not happen, or why we may save it for the future. And I think that when people see that over and over again, it's quite helpful.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, sorry, Christine. So when you had mentioned back when you were designing, and as you would potentially move up the ladder, so to speak, you would get away from designing. Have you found that the same in marketing as you've gone up the ladder? Have you let go of stuff or had to let go of stuff that you miss?
Such a good question. I have, but I think for sure. And I think it's different because I really loved the aspect of being a creator and design, and product marketing, for what it's worth, is not the same.
That's
so
fair.
I actually find that the problems or the things that I get to roll up my sleeves and dig into are just sometimes bigger problems, or they're just problems at a different scale. And so while I miss things here and there, I generally feel that it's just a different version of the same thing at a different level. So so that's where I found peace with that, for sure.
As you were you transitioned in 2018 to Ginger, and really curious to hear about that experience. But like when you think back on that Fitbit experience, what were some of the market, sorry, not marketing, but the leadership lessons that you took from that time?
Yeah. Again, a lot of those. So one that I can describe is really just this need to be deliberate and thoughtful about how we grow teams, grow people, grow business. And certainly I think there are some things that I probably would have experimented with or done differently that had an impact on both the business and the people in a way that I think I could have been more deliberate about. Events that we threw, investments that we made, all that kind of stuff. A lot of it, I feel like my learning, again, it just comes from observing other people. And, my last manager that I had at Fitbit, who is a woman named Amy McDonough, and she now leads health solutions under the Google umbrella. She's an incredible leader. And at the time, this was pre, oh my God, I can't think of the hashtag, but the whole Harvey Weinstein.
Me too.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is pre-Me Too. But there's this sort of bubbling element of can women be, Sheryl Sandberg's book had just come up. It's can you be successful without being an asshole at work? And one of the things that I have learned and continue to learn from Amy through observation is we had a nickname for her, which is the Velvet Hammer, because she was so pleasant. She's so nice. She's so great. She's so thoughtful. And then, she knows how to get it done. And she's built the relationships to do that. She's trusted by the organization around her. And, to me, it's sort of you can be kind, you can be thoughtful, but you can also be really clear about what needs to happen. And I think she was just a master at doing that, and someone that I learned from and have continued to learn from time and time again. So that's one. The third lessons come to more in a macro view, and I would say is still a set of lessons that I'm continuing to learn today, is how to function in a multi-sided market, right? Which is, you have certainly within our healthcare system, a lot of people who consume a service or a product but don't actually pay for it. And so you have like differential incentives, a lot of people to make happy. Fitbit, I think, was a really interesting experience in terms of how to balance, I think, the tensions of what is a B2B to D business in healthcare, which is quite complex. So a lot of, I think, my lessons kind of out of like how you structure teams, how you organize them in such a way where you can really capitalize the most on what is an amazing brand, right? In the case of Fitbit, but also the technological prowess and expertise of having all this data at hand and what you could do with that to empower people, consumers, and businesses.
Yeah.
And take that with me too.
I hadn't even thought about the amount of data. Oh my gosh. It must have been a man. Yeah. So you've got these lessons that you've learned. Now this was the first time you've been a CMO. So you're moving over to the CMO role at Ginger. Talk about that. Because it's been I'm just the whole journey all the way to Headspace. Like, I'm super curious about all of it.
Yeah. So I'd been at Fitbit for some time. We'd been public for about 2 years. One of the last things that I did before I left was I worked on a acquisition that they did of a small company called Twine, which was based in Boston. And, as with public companies, when you do a merger, you have a really small team that can be working on it, and you generally have to move fast. And there are very few people who are what we call under the 10. And I remember going through that. It was probably like a month-long process of how we would communicate, how we would get this together with the small team. And I remember feeling more invigorated than I had in years. Right? I was like, oh my gosh, like, I love this. Like, this is so, like, we can move so fast. There's, not a ton of process that you can or have to go through, because it's just, 7 people who are working on this. And it really solidified for me as I looked for that next role, what the challenge I was looking for next was to go back to an earlier stage company. Again, Castlight was about 60 people when I joined. Fitbit was around 200 when I joined. I think Castlight, when I left, was about 500. Fitbit was 1,500. Wow. And so I started interviewing for roles in I'm coming up on 5 years having been in this version of a role. And I remember I talked to this small company at the time it was called Ginger.io. So Ginger.io. And I'd gotten an outreach from their, at the time, CEO and some other folks to come and talk to us about this role. I was like, I don't even know what this company does. Like, I went to the website. I was like, I still don't know what they do. But I continued. In every conversation that I had, I learned a little bit something more. And so I went from, kind of interesting, great investors, like really smart people here, I still don't know what they do, to over the course of literally 6 months, taking on progressive conversations. In every conversation, I'd learn something new. I'd be like, oh my God, like, why does nobody know this? And I got to the end of it. I was like, oh my gosh, you know what they need? They need a marketer, which is why we were talking. And I can actually do that.
Yeah.
And if, as a marketer, one of the greatest gifts you can be given is a product that people love and that works. And in this case, they seem to have this in spades in a way that just no one was yet communicating. And so I took a leap of faith and took the role. The company had actually been around for about 7 years already and had gone through multiple pivots and to kind of find the right product market fit. And this was the beginning of the journey that certainly we've been on now. And at the time we were doing, less than $1 million in ARR. So it's really, really early. We had a couple of big clients. We were really building the plane and flying it. at the same
Well-
time, for sure. I mean, my paycheck was written by hand.
Oh, wow.
Like it was a big change. It was a big change. And, but you know, it speaks to really just the passion of people and, what you can get done when you have, like a very mighty small
Yeah.
group of folks who care deeply about what you're doing. And at the time, you know, the first product was this, sort of text-based coaching product. We had 5 coaches at the time. We didn't offer therapy or psychiatry because that's a whole sort of regulatory process that you have to go through. And at the time, you know, Talkspace was just becoming a thing, but like people weren't doing telehealth, right? You weren't being like, okay, I'm gonna like get on a Zoom and talk to my doctor. You were like, that's so weird. Like, what would they be? What would anybody be able to
They
do
only
to me
knew.
for me on a camera if they only
Yeah,
knew?
exactly. Yeah.
And so people, when I tell people we did do that, like, so you like talk with someone about your feelings on a text, like, who is this person? And so, you know, fast forward now, we've been through this confluence of a pandemic, a mental health crisis, not unrelated, you know, economic uncertainty. You know, it's amazing to see, I think, the truly global cultural transformation in terms of how this category is viewed, the importance of it, people's willingness to engage in that conversation and to do something about it in a way that I certainly couldn't have predicted when I took the role early on at Ginger. But I like to think that we were one of many companies who were taking charge and giving people the tools and resources to realize that this was something that was very important to them. And Headspace, right, of course, which was founded actually around the same timeline as Ginger, which, you know, really democratized this concept that people really thought of something as, you know, monks, you know, in the mountains doing, and brought it really to earth for people in a way that was practical and understandable and fun and delightful.
Right.
And, you know, again, we merged about, at this point, it's about a year and a half ago. So just about a third of my journey at the time at Ginger. And, you know, it's pretty amazing to watch the transformation of certainly Ginger, the legacy company, but our companies as a whole over the last year and a half.
So I'm super curious about the merger because that's, you know, bringing, how big were the two companies personnel-wise at the time?
I think Headspace was about 250 to 300 folks. Ginger was about 500, and that's primarily because many of the staff are licensed clinicians and behavioral health coaches that are on staff to be able to help serve our members. The call it corporate side was a little bit smaller. We are today around 1,100 people.
Oh.
So it's
big organization. Yeah.
It's a big organization.
How did, you know, how similar were the cultures, or were they different? And if they were, like, how did you kind of mesh everything together so that people felt like they belonged?
I'll go out and say it's the absolute hardest part of any merger, I'm sure, as you've heard. Even in the best of industrial logic does not make a merger easy. That's what it comes down to. Very similar in terms of mission orientation and of passion, I would say, and that you can't replace that. And so that's been amazing, I think, to witness people coming together in this way. Differences were, you know, Ginger was a San Francisco-based company, very much, you know, like a Silicon Valley tech company. Headspace based in Santa Monica, lots of incredible talent from streaming, entertainment. And so you can imagine, just like in that sense, quite different in terms of people's backgrounds, points of view, work that they're doing. And then, you know, if you imagine, like, what company can you think of where you have people who produce Emmy award-winning content and also have therapists, right? Like that's really the range of folks that we have in the company, with just like a range of both professional lived experience. And so while the cultures, and I think the ethos behind the cultures are very similar, I think again, jobs to be done, but the work is quite different. And being able to communicate in a way that everybody understands about where we're going in terms of our strategy, where we want to be as a company, our vision means different things to different people, just given how diverse I think our workforce is.
What were some of the things that you did as you started to work on the merger?
I mean, it always comes back to values. Always, people and values. I think, it is for certain that there will be areas of tension, areas of change where, we had one process that we do this.
Yeah.
This other team has not. So do we continue to just ignore that these two things are really different and continue to do them differently, or we find a way to collaborate and do those together? And those can be tension-fueled conversations many times. There's an enormous tax on the organization when you go through a merger. And again, like if you can get back to putting humans at the center of it, both the people that we have committed to helping around the world, as well as all of us as people ourselves. Remembering that we did a merger in the middle of a pandemic, remotely.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so hard to do. It's not like you can throw like a big party and everybody gets together, and that, you don't have the option of doing any of those things. And so we did some things where, for example, we spent a lot of time soliciting input from employees on developing our new set of values together. And so we did work groups. We brought specific cohorts together. We did surveys on this so that when we landed on our set of values, they were co-crafted by our employees and by the team.
Yeah.
And that level of ownership, I think, is incredibly important for people to feel vested, that they're not being told what to do, but this is inherently actually who we are and how we're going to operate in this way. And I think it helped us tremendously, right, in terms of being able to, at the end of the day, have empathy for one another when we need to make changes or when we need to collaborate on something, and to always assume good intent.
Yeah.
Right. Which can be easier said than done.
Yeah, it's so easy to lose the human side, right? But if you focus on that, it can make it a little bit easier for folks. Christine, we love to cap interviews by, first off, thank you for coming on and sharing your journey. It's been fascinating. And now that we've reflected and we've had this conversation, I'm curious, like, if you could do it all over again, would you walk down the same path or would you do it differently?
Totally. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. I love being able to connect the dots, and of course it's easier to do in hindsight, but so much I think of every part of my career and my life, has helped me to learn the things that I know today and be able to share that, in these conversations and with my team, including some of the bigger mistakes I think that they've made or it's been an incredible learning experience, and I wouldn't change it.
Oh, and Brendan, before you ask that last question, we got to ask, did you meet John Legend in the Super Bowl ad?
Yeah, I did not. My team did. It was the pandemic when we shot this. So one person from my team was able to go, but from what I heard, very gracious.
Oh, that's great. Brendan, back over to you. Sorry, I just had to ask.
Because he's from Ohio. That's why, right?
Totally.
It's from Ohio. So Christine, where can people learn more about you? Where do you want them? Where do you want to send them?
Yeah. Certainly for me personally, LinkedIn is a great way to find me, get in touch with me. I love connecting with folks, from all industry, all walks of life, and love taking those conversations. So find me on LinkedIn, and I would love to chat.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thanks, Christine. This was fun for me. You're kicking ass, and please continue. It's great. It's so good to see you.
Christine.
So good to see you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Christine Evans from Headspace. Thanks again. This was awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Leadership Backstory. Make sure to subscribe from your favorite podcast player and leave us a review if you like what you hear. We appreciate you sharing your feedback with other listeners. Peter Barron and Brendan Schneider host The Leadership Backstory. Catch you on the next episode.